Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming along this afternoon. My name's Chris Berry. I work here at King's, and I'm also been involved this year in helping to host the Chinese Visual Festival. This event this evening is a kind of double event. It's a public lecture in the Chinese Visual Festival, and it's also part of the AHRC-funded Chinese Film Festival Studies Research Network events, which we've been having a workshop today, and we're also pleased to be able to have this lecture as part of that event. Earlier this afternoon, those of you who were able to attend when we had a panel discussion with film festival organizers heard the organizers of the Visual Festival, Yingying and Zhang Xuhua, explain to us that one of the reasons they had discovered over the years that their audiences and the kinds of films they showed worked particularly well in academic environments. And one of the things that led them to want to come to King's and led us to cooperate together was the possibility of adding into the festival more Q&As, more panels, more discussion opportunities, and more opportunities to give more background and more context. So this evening we're very pleased to have a very distinguished speaker, Professor Dina Iordanova, who is from St Andrews University. I'm not going to read out long lists of books, otherwise we will be here all evening. But Dina is known for her work in at least two major fields of work, as well as for establishing and building the very successful department at St Andrews. And in one major area of her work has been on the cinema of the Balkans and Eastern Europe in general. And she's really pioneered that very rapidly growing field of subfield of cinema studies. But the other area where she's had a really crucial role has been in film festival studies. This morning in some of our work she sort of scoffed at the idea that film festival studies could ever be a field, but I mean, if it is a field, it's because of what Dina, among others, but especially has done to pioneer it, because as well as writing on film festivals for many years now, she's also worked together with other people to publish a series of film yearbooks, film festival yearbooks, and also other volumes that look at film festivals. And so this has established a very large and growing body of work on academic work that tries to analyze film festivals. Unquestionably, this has been motivated by, at least partly, by the increasing number of film festivals and their increasingly important role, where they have become a distribution and exhibition site in their own right, and have become vital for the continuation of various kinds of filmmaking and also the building of various kinds of film culture. In recent years, Dina has been traveling a lot more to East Asia and to China. A couple of years ago, maybe now 3 or 4 years ago, she co-edited a book on film festivals and film festival culture in East Asia. And she was telling us this morning that at the time when she wrote her contribution to that book, she didn't know as much as she has gathered since about what's happening with Chinese films on the International Film Festival circuit and Chinese film festivals. And she's going to give us a public lecture tonight that the title of which you can see, which addresses that topic. So please join me in welcoming Dina, and there will be a Q&A after her public lecture.
Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. And I'll open with a few remarks. First of all, Chris, thank you very much for the introduction, the invitation. I'm really pleased to be here. It is due to meeting you at some point that I actually know now more about the film festival. So this definitely this has made a big difference. Secondly, again, led by the practice of some colleagues at King's who normally write their talks and then present them, I have today made an exception. I usually just talk from slides, but I have a written talk, so please apologize if I'm not making eye contact sufficiently, because I do intend to read most of the time. And I suppose most of you know much better than me how to pronounce the names that I'm going to be referencing from time to time. Luckily, there are not too many Chinese names. But if you feel lost, like, cannot figure who I'm talking about, like, please, like, I rely here on the support of colleagues. The popular image of the Chinese still gravitates between straight-faced, black-suited comrades and busloads of female tourists headed to the Burberry outlet in Hackney. Yet a uniform version of China is no longer viable for the post-American world. The story needs to be augmented if a real dialogue is to occur. The commonplace rise of the middle-class consumer needs to be counterbalanced by stories from the real or actual China, as you were saying earlier today. In this talk, I will attempt to explore how the film festival circuit facilitates the rise of corrective Chinese themes into the public sphere. The proliferating festivals and festival showcases, mainstream and alternative, diasporic and domestic, officially sanctioned and underground ones, channel the emergence of multiple narratives, from the budding feminist Qizhu to seditious Tongji, to the forlorn sisters Yingying, Zhenzhen and Fenfen, from Wang Bing's film. Why would we care for these three little village girls? Why would we want to sit and watch their dealings with the goats and in the pigsty, rather than opt for a sleek action with martial arts full of swish special effects? Like other Wang Bing films, Three Sisters makes for a demanding viewing. It looks more like Italian neorealism than a Shaolin fantasy, more like La Terra Trema than La Dolce Vita. What it does is to facilitate the emergence of a more diverse, varied and complex China in the minds of the viewers. It is an emergence of individual human experiences to which one can relate. This emergence takes place through the conduit of festivals. Even if working in uncoordinated fashion, circulation of films, and I'm showing here images of three films which you perhaps can recognize, most of you. Even if working in uncoordinated fashion, circulation of films through the festivals unpacks, complicates, and ultimately translates the narrative of a country and assists that the formulaic cliché is gradually dropped in favor of a more complex, multifaceted, and multi-layered understanding, that the limited range of circulating stereotypes is substituted by a multitude of characters. It is a process of opening up, surfacing, of translation that can be consequential and far-reaching. The discovery of Chinese cinema certainly takes place through the festival circuit. The discovery of China itself also takes place here, to a very big extent. Films and festivals indeed do construct, suggest, and sustain certain narratives of countries. It is fascinating to see this process of translating and unfolding a culture at work. I have seen a similar thing happen once before, nearly 30 years ago, which suggests how old I am, at the time of the perestroika opening of the Soviet Union. This was in the early 80s. And I think it would be worthwhile to recall how it evolved, as it bears certain comparisons with the current state of affairs with China at the festivals. Back then, it started with glasnost, the dynamic discourse around secrecy and openness. Then it went on with uncomfortable revelations and reassessment of narratives of the glorious past of socialist conquests. It was supposed to be a process of reset, one that would allow for new beginnings. Censorship and its eradication had a big part to play. And international film festivals had a special role, one of actively uncovering and honoring censored works. All large mainstream festivals in the West made their contribution to this process in the early 80s. Some curated programs that revisited anguished or hushed episodes of Soviet history. Others focused on the films tackling the throwaway Soviet incursion into Afghanistan at the time, and the traumas inflicted on a whole generation of young war veterans who came to be known as Afghansi, and became an emblem of the terminal decay of communism. Soul-searching post-utopian tales such as Tengiz Abuladze Repentance provided hot material for international festival programmers. Films showing vulnerable protagonists spiraling into poverty and descending into madness were preferentially shown, thus precipitating the development of a genre known today as Chernucha, which was to become narratives of gloom and doom, usually, which was to become the first new genre in the cinema of the post-communist period. The involvement of directors with the festival circuit was important as well, and the circuit gave this involvement a certain spin. Alexander Askoldov, for example, you see him here with Susan Sontag at Berlinale, his astounding film Kommissar was embraced by the Berlin Film Festival, but it was not clear if it was because of his singular early take on the Holocaust or because it was the last censored film to emerge from the vaults. The New York Film Festival featured a retrospective of Sergei Parajanov, you see Parajanov here, the great Georgian-Armenian image maker, but Parajanov seemed to be applauded more because he had been victimized as homosexual rather than for his extraordinary films. Andrei Tarkovsky, the universally recognized Khan Tsar, living in spiritual seclusion in the West, was portrayed in the media as dissident in exile. Members of the younger generation, like Latvian documentarian Yuri Spodnieks or feature filmmakers Pavel Lungin and Sergei Solovyov, were lauded as pioneers of a new daring vision. It was all meant to welcome Russia's arrival into the free world and celebrate the great promise of perestroika. Somehow, however, the attention remained preferentially focused on the repression and the control. Later on, censorship came to an end, and so did perestroika, with the demise of the Soviet Union. The expected opening up of Russia as a vast new territory of opportunity did not materialize, and cultural exchanges did not become more intense. Russia and the West drifted apart. The excitement about the brave censored works that emerged during the Glasnost period gradually faded away. The directors linked with the period also vanished from public view. Some, like Askoldov, emigrated and went into obscurity. Others continued to make films that no one watches. Tarkovsky, Parajanov, and Podnieks died. Today, it is all just a distant memory. Looking at Chinese cinema at the festival nowadays, I cannot help but having a déjà vu. Having started around the time of perestroika, but being put on hold by the Tiananmen Square upheaval, the resurfacing of independent Chinese filmmaking in the West invites a comparison. Tireless dissident Ai Weiwei is all over the place nowadays. Jie Zhangke duly graduated from Venice to Cannes' main competition this year. Wang Bing is celebrated both at mainstream and documentary festivals. Wu Wenguang, I cannot say this name, is in my mind the equivalent of Podnieks. Zhang Yuan and Lu Ye of Pavel Lungin and Sergei Solovyov. It is for their art that they are in the spotlight, yet it is their regular run-ins with censorship that keeps the interest alive and makes them newsworthy. I'm asking myself, however, what degree of obscurity is likely to befall those whose names are now constantly spelled at the festivals once censorship issues fade away. Back then, the films of Lungin, Askoldov, or Podnieks were talked up in the media, yet remained of niche interest and never received proper distribution. It is the same setup that I observe today, with even multiple award-winning brilliant works of a number of these directors that remained confined to a narrow festival circuit and never properly distributed. Now, it all evolved the way it did because the economic promise of perestroika, the expected opening up of Russia, did not materialize. Welcoming of new cinematic narratives, defeating censorship were no more than sidebars in this process. The so-called free world was interested in the opportunities that these new territories would provide. It was not interested in Russia's soul-searching in films. The opportunities did not come about, so the interest in the culture disappeared. We are still to see how it will go in the Chinese case. But let's be clear. All the interest is, once again, driven by the prospect of opportunity, and it is not impartial. It is inequitable and conditional. Whilst the rhetoric is one that welcomes China's arrival, in reality, the only interest is to see China open up to the free world. Respectively, the framework is one of selective translation, one in which the free world selectively chooses the narratives that would come through. Films that attempt to expose an extensively corrupt system or revisit painful episodes of history, namely that reveal situations that could benefit from the democratic expertise of the West, are particularly favored. The West is not interested in China in itself, but in China as an opportunity. It comes through most successfully, most succinctly, in Jim Rogers' appeal, see their films, made in a book called A Bull in China, published in 2007, which today is established as the classical piece of writing on the subject matter of investing in what is regarded as the world's most lucrative market. The most sensible skill that I can give to somebody born in 2003 is a perfect command of Mandarin, Roger is quoted saying. Credit Suisse website claims that Rogers is so bullish on China because that he believes that educating his young daughters about China is the best thing he could do for them. He has bought them DVDs of Chinese films, and he has even hired a Chinese nanny so that they can master Mandarin. Anthony Bolton, Britain's most successful investor who has run money all his life, is not far behind. He moved to Hong Kong a few years back to run a new fund called China Special Situations. Here he is at his newly found playground in Shanghai. Quite naturally, in such context, films coming out of China are always framed, translated, in the context of some political reading. Even if not immediately visible, festivals, and especially the mainstream ones, do have an agenda, a fact that has come across loud and clear in a variety of situations in relation to Chinese examples. Zhang Yimou, single-handed and now almost forgotten attempt to take on at Cannes back in 1999, when the festival rejected the inclusion of his Not One Less in competition, is a case I have in mind. In response to the rejected, the director, who had started with the Golden Bear at Berlinale for Red Sorghum in 1987, then moved on to Venice, where he received Golden Lion in 1992 for The Story of Kijou, and then he had graduated to Cannes in 1994 with Grand Prix du Jury for To Live, which is a very critical film. Clearly expected that his career will continue, but faced this rejection, so he protested in an open letter saying that I cannot accept that when it comes to Chinese films, the West seems for a long time to have had just one political reading. I'm not going to read this, obviously, what I'm displaying. You can read it for yourself. So, Zhang Yimou's letter to Cannes International Film Festival in 1999 about the rejection of Not One Less. Later that year, Not One Less won the Golden Lion at Venice a few months later. This incident, now nearly forgotten or reinterpreted in light of Zhang Yimou's subsequent career moves, which many people have criticized, opens up an array of complex considerations that I have been hugely interested in since this controversy occurred. Going far beyond the specific Chinese case, it was one of the rare instances where concern was made vocal, even though the situation itself was nothing more but yet another one of the multiple examples where grand European festivals were shown to sifting material through their own agenda. It had happened the same way many times before with films from the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe. Most of the trailblazing directors of the fifth generation have now, like their Soviet counterparts, disappeared from the rosters of haute couture festivals. People like Chen Kaik or occasionally other fifth-generation directors re-emerge into festival competitions from time to time, mainly on the basis of former glory, and are tolerated rather than welcomed. Zhang Yimou would also have been forgotten had it not been for his ability to reinventing himself, his dissident credentials long obliterated, of course. Yet, whilst the love affair of the grand festivals with the Russians and the fifth generation is long over, the flirting with China not only goes on, but escalates, alongside intensifying trade links. Jie Zhangke, for example, has now graduated from Venice, taking on Cannes with the aptly named A Touch of Sin. The respective pointed commentary does not fail to follow, repeating the familiar pattern of politicized framing of the previous 2 decades. I'm afraid I'm quoting a friend here who's provided this politicized. Richard Porton of Cineast writes, "It now remains to be seen whether A Touch of Sin, which seems like an audaciously critical film to Western eyes, will achieve wide distribution in Asia." And then Porton speculates that Jia's social commentary might prove too potent for the authorities. So this is the only commentary he's provided of the film, not what the film is about, but if it will be distributed really, and how it will cope with censorship. But to come back to my main line of inquiry here, most of the festival interest in Chinese cinema and most of the interest in Chinese film festivals is, in one way or another, determined by the current state of play related to the shifting global position of China. On the one hand, it is a country in ascent, which nonetheless stubbornly operates an arbitrary and opaque censorship routine. On the other hand, it is the world's biggest market for cinema exhibition, and thus a country of great promise and opportunity. Here I will scrutinize two categories of festivals that have sprung up to the forefront in reaction to this status quo. One is what I term the corrective festival, and the other one, the business card exchange festival. So here is some of the corrective festival, and I'll also pull up. Okay. And I'll come back to this distinction. So these are, in my opinion, the two types of festivals we have. They each have a specific constellation of stakeholders, as I will elaborate later on. At each one of them, the films are not the most important element, and specific interests are served, largely falling under the umbrella of cultural diplomacy, respectively, just different aspects of cultural diplomacy. Respectively, each one of these types of festivals writes itself in a specific way, to use Daniel Dayan's term, by seeking to address different facets of the public opinion. Let's first look at the corrective festival. It comes about in reaction to the usually clumsy and inept efforts of the People's Republic diplomats to use cinema, which I'm not planning to spend any significant time on, but who still need to mention it in passing. One such instance is the 2-day-long Chinese Film Festival, traditionally organized by the Permanent Mission of the People's Republic at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva, on the occasion of the annual UN Chinese Language Day in April. By coincidence, I happened to be visiting the United Nations headquarters in Geneva on one of these days of the festival in 2012, last year. My host, a former student, an Indian national, who is a veteran of the UN, told me that years ago, when the festival was first launched, it appeared attractive, but the selection of films gradually killed all the interest. Indeed, it did not seem that many of the UN employees were flocking to the screenings. The concurrent lecture on Chinese medicine and weight loss seemed to draw more attention. This year's April, the festival in Geneva seems to have been programmed with more attention and focused on anti-Japanese films from the 1930s, alongside an exhibition of 108 Chinese film posters at Palais de Nation in Geneva. Typically, the coverage of the event focuses less on the film selection and opts to comment instead on the notable absence of independent activist documentary from the program. I'm displaying here a review of what is happening there by a guy called William Dowell, obviously a journalist working in Geneva. So to repeat, the coverage focuses less on the film selection and more on the notable absence of independent activist documentary. Adopting the traditional patronizing tone, journalist William Dowell remarks that China's National Language Day might have been better served by showing a truer representation, and the added emphasis is mine. So it talks about truer and representation, he demands it. He cannot help expressing his strong preference to an alternative version of cultural diplomacy, one where vocal activist filmmakers like Ai Weiwei or Wu Wenguang would serve as more convincing ambassadors for the true force of China's contemporary culture. So you see, true, I mean, this is the rhetoric which is important in this case. The emphasis in the quote is added by me, I said, highlighting this rhetoric of the absence of truth, or absence of truth for representation, as opposed to an implied incorrect representation, in the efforts of China's cultural diplomacy, is in the core of motivation for what I term a corrective film festival. The premise is that cultural diplomacy's officially sanctioned selections are, by default, barring critical representations, and therefore biased, and one-sided. In order for truer representation to come about, one must ensure that the program is put together by detached and independent curators who are not always dispassionate and prejudiced. The objective is to correct the official narrative by complicating it and bringing to light snubbed themes and disregarded storylines. Besides this specific motivation, curatorial slant, and political message, the corrective festival, a subcategory of the activist festival, has got a specific configuration of stakeholders. It actively seeks to cultivate an audience and educate it. Concurrent discussions and events are often more important than the films. The interests of mainstream festival stakeholder groups such as industry or city authorities are not served here, whereas the featured filmmakers often have a higher degree of involvement than usual, and so do specialist media. I would even claim that such circuit of events is key sometimes for a number of directors who launch or make their careers through this type of festival. In the short history of my interest in Asian festivals, the issue about distinguishing between film festival and film exhibition first popped up back in 2010, when, whilst preparing the Film Festivals in East Asia volume, I came to realize that some of the important industry-staged public relations events in the region, such as the Asia Pacific Film Festival, the Golden Horse Awards, and Film Festival in Taipei, were actually connoted, and this is what I cannot pronounce, was it Jan? Yes, so probably I have to display, I think, yes, okay, so this is Chris what I was getting from your slide, yes. More adequately translated as exhibition rather than as GIA, festival. You can probably say the correct pronunciation again. This same distinction between exhibition and festival was made more recently in another context by Chris Berry. Talking at the conference in Pamplona earlier this month, he noted the trend of the underground, or what he terms fugitive independent festivals, to align themselves more with the concept of genre, whereas the officially recognized festivals tended to describe themselves more with the term GIE. Looking at the corrective festival concept that I want to put forward here, the distinction of genre and GIE comes in quite handy once again. In fact, the most clear-cut corrective film festival is not really the typical inclusive festival where Chinese language films would coexist in competition or in a more diverse programming context, but much more those that can be described as an exhibition or a series or a panorama that puts forward a specific curatorial concept and showcases an exclusive selection of films that are meant to represent certain realities and thus correct the record that biased media coverage or skewed angle of the mainstream festivals may have created. These are more exhibitions first, the corrective festivals, because they are often topical, one-off events, and second, as they are curated in a way that intends to pass on a certain message. One example is the two China-related film series that showed this season at the Oriental Musée Guimet in Paris. Regard sur la Chine is a poster of one of the events. One is Pekin Embarquement Immédiat, which could be described either as a festival or an exhibition, and it describes itself as a festival, but I personally think it's more of an exhibition, and includes about 15 films combining documentary, feature, and shorts that are meant to present a comprehensive and diverse image of Beijing. The other one which I display here is an ethnographic film festival. No, sorry, I don't display it. Musée Guimet again, entitled La Chine du Rituel. This is actually what is shown. Du sinologue derrière la caméra. I'd like to suggest that the translation of China through the festival conduit takes place much more in the context of these corrective festivals or exhibitions, rather than in the context of the mainstream festivals, which I think transpired in discussions today quite clearly. It is not the 3 films by Wang Bing screened at Edinburgh Festival in 2012, and not the screenings of Jia's A Touch of Sin at Cannes that makes the difference. The topical panoramas that mix documentary, feature, and ethnographic films around a theme do more for translating, for putting together and telling a story. I will look at some more concrete examples, how a festival talks about this itself. The rhetoric usually evolves around terms such as real image, as opposed to manipulating or one-sided, unveiled, as opposed to censored, controlled, or at least one that is complex and thus comprehensive. The corrective, remedial, and counteractive slant of these events is often reflected in the very title of the event, as in the case of New York University's festival entitled Real China, which is probably the clearest example. Another one would be Forbidden No More, the New China in Ethnographic Film Festival and Conference of 2012 at the college in the States, focusing on new ethnographic films about contemporary China and featuring films that explore the changing social landscape. Made by both Western and Asia-based filmmakers, the selection of films is meant to consider contemporary China through a myriad of lenses, they say. Here, of course, the title of Forbidden No More is a marketing tool used by the curators of the event to suggest that their exhibition will provide a remedial insight beyond the one-sided and incomplete, thus incorrect narrative of the country that is supposedly in circulation due to the restrictive policy and moves of official cultural diplomacy. Another recent high-profile example of such corrective exhibition festival is the series Chinese Realities Documentary Visions, running still until 2 more days between 8th of May and 1st June this year at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It is a pretty typical representative of the genre, in that whilst evolving around documentaries that span over 2 decades, going as far back as 1990 for Bumming in Beijing and as recent as When Night Falls from last year, it also uses a number of feature films that fit the narrative that the curators want to put forward. All films that can be said to have a certain documentary quality to them and are suitable for correcting the record. A constructed narrative of the curator's vision of modern day in China. The notes to the event talk of proliferation of the reality aesthetics, and whilst the rhetoric is mainly about the emergence of new documentary aesthetics embracing alternative visions, of uncensored personal expression and newfound fascination with unbridled realism, the bottom line is that the series aims to provide a corrective, fuller, and panoramic vision of China's epochal transformation, thus admitting that it deals with more complex notions of what reality means and how it is represented, which is not only limited to independence and which is not only confined to ostracized documentary, but assumes that fictional narratives also shape the perception to some extent. And yet another last example, perhaps the most successful one in terms of bringing about a thorough and inclusive curatorial concept, is the 80 film exhibition du Pékin à Taipei, Mille Visages de la Chine, curated by critic Jean-Michel Frodon, which ran at the Forum des Images in Paris throughout January and February this year, featuring guest appearances and talks with a number of Chinese directors, as well as offering a dedicated YouTube channel that shows clips from 57 of the films presented in the cycle. The series builds on a curatorial concept that aims to celebrate the complex dynamics of Chinese language urbanism. Here I'm quoting from a personal communication with Rodon, starting with the perceived rivalry, he insisted, between Beijing and Shanghai. I admit I did not know of this awful rivalry, but it's a leading thing. But then further complicating the narrative by also bringing in fragmented identities of Taipei as well as Hong Kong's special status. In his original concept, Rodon also wanted to expand to include Singapore and Kuala Lumpur, but these intentions were curtailed for the sake of including a selection on the global Chinatown, featuring diasporic life in San Francisco and Vancouver. So he includes this in the concept. The focus is on the multifaceted nature of what is presented as a global urban phenomenon, and the selection alternates between Chinese language and Western-made fiction films and documentaries that depict the mutating reality of the megalopolis, where idiosyncrasies and contrasts have fashioned the collective history. Moving to the People's Republic of China, I would like to put some scrutiny on the other type of festival, which I have called the Business Card Exchange Festival. Let's take the main one, which was spoken extensively about today and in other times, the Shanghai International Film Festival, in existence since 1993. One of the only 2 festivals in Asia, the other one is Tokyo International Film Festival, that holds FIAP coveted A status. In his writing on Shanghai International Film Festival over the years, first in 2007, then 2009, and most recently in a general assessment produced in 2013, Chris Berry deplores the festival's poor film selection. Even if it ticks all the boxes for a leading festival, as he says, it somehow fails to excite, especially as far as films are concerned. Indeed, Shanghai seems to be the place to go for everything except the films. Quote, its competition is renowned for including, again, another quote, the world's worst films. Yet, paradoxically, he remarks, more guests attend from around the world every year, and more of those guests are repeats. Well, yes, they would be back, and they would be back for more. Because, of course, the Shanghai Film Festival is not a festival that is about films. Interestingly, even if it features a market, it cannot even be described as a festival where one does business, as the deals done here are far and few between. Shanghai, however, is a place to exchange business cards, to meet people and put in stakes for later on, and it is these exchanges where the newly printed 2-sided English-Chinese business cards of the Westerners can land in the hands of suited Chinese officials. And this is where the added value of this festival occurs. Even though it is to show that it makes any meaningful business yet, the Shanghai film market promotes itself with the slogan, China's only film market. The returning guests at Shanghai would not really be put off by the absence of worthy films. Many of them do not even come anywhere near the screenings. The guests who keep returning to Shanghai year after year do not really come for movies. On the Chinese side of the guest roster, the festival is attended by the new class of moneyed film industry executives, some of who are rich enough to make it to the Forbes rich list or to the gossip pages of the Cannes Chronicles. If you Google a search quickly, you can see how the luggage of some Chinese executive the other day was pilfered and, reported significant losses and so on, reporting what has been stolen from them. The festival is perceived as a gatekeeper to the lucrative market, where they all come to cultivate contacts, actively working toward a breakthrough and preparing to be one step ahead for the long-anticipated point in time when China will finally open up its vast marketplace for foreign film imports. As a business card exchange festival, Shanghai has an idiosyncratic configuration of stakeholders with specific stress on industry players and distributors. Ironically, it is the same crowd who populate festivals like Cannes or places like Show West, which does not even qualify as a festival on most people's minds, and who used to frequent the now defunct autumn film market MIFED in Milan. The festival's being in love with power, prestige, and glamour is just a routine part of the corporate experience paired with the official dome of socialist-style cultural diplomacy and political deal-making. The London-based China Image Film Festival is yet another one of these business card exchange festivals. It lists its location as Leicester Square in London and describes itself as the most influential and the most anticipated Chinese team event hosted abroad, and has adopted the slogan to impress the world. I must admit that in my 10+ years of studying festivals, I had never heard of the China Image Fest until the Pamplona event 3 weeks ago, where Chris Berry noted that these claims have nothing to do with the reality, that it is all cultural diplomacy protocol rhetoric designed for reporting to officials and financial backers back home. Even if the festival's stated goals are to provide the outstanding contemporary Chinese films with an international platform open to the world audience, it is yet another festival that does not have much to do with the actual films. It is yet another business card exchange platform, using the pretext that it would help Chinese film in cultivating the overseas market, whereas, in fact, it gives London-based film executives an opportunity to exchange business cards with the respective Chinese bureaucratic figureheads, when they are not shopping at Harrods, that's it. In the context of hosting the Sino-Anglo Business and Finance Forum, which has its location at the Houses of Lords, and the Industry Forum, and the closing and opening galas. On the surface, both Shanghai and the China Image Film Festival are bona fide festivals that tick all the boxes for their respective kind. Beyond that, however, they are festivals that mainly service one particular kind of stakeholder, the film business executive who is not here for the films. As I have written elsewhere, besides many other things, film festivals are clusters of creativity and commerce, and frequently bridge the film industry with politics and other spheres. Industry and political needs are serviced at the festival behind the facade of public service rhetoric. In the case of these business card festivals, it is not particularly difficult to see how the interests of the public and audiences are, in fact, being neglected for the sake of setting up political and commercial alliances, which came across loud and clear this morning for those who attended the festival workshop event, with the example of Beijing Film Festival not even having proper films the first year. This is all only just brewing for now. So all these exchanges are just brewing for now, in sweet anticipation of the big breakthrough, the day when China will open its doors to the free flow of Western product. For the time being, India and China still remain the two territories that Hollywood producers have not yet been able to crack, even if trying for many years. With its 90+% of box office revenues going to Indian films and the repeat viewing patterns of the local population, India has been the target for a variety of resourceful schemes, some of which appear to be bearing fruit, yet I somehow feel that so far, all moves of rapprochement between Hollywood and Bollywood of recent years have consistently brought more advantages to the Indian side than to the Americans. The seduction of the Chinese, however, seems to be going somewhat smoother, even if slower, and in that sphere, Hollywood may be a step closer to seeing quotas removed and restrictions of foreign imports lifted, thus allowing the free flow of ideas, an euphemism for Jack Valenti's vision of Hollywood's global hegemony. The Business Card Festival is undoubtedly one of the key instruments of realizing this vision, a site to salivate over the prospects of handsome returns on whichever product they manage to enter in the marketplace, where it would get exposure to the world's biggest audience, in Michael Curtin's term. Indeed, there is every sign to suggest that this is a market that will explode soon. Around 2 new cinemas are opening every day in China for a projected number of cinemas 5 years from now at 150,000 screens. A growing middle class is looking for ways to spend time and money. Ticket sales are up a third last year. The box office is now worth a blockbusting 1.9 billion pounds, which in dollars would be more, obviously. A nice record of this anticipation can be found on the China Film Biz blog, run by China-based consultant Rob Kane, who is also a media pundit, making utterings on everything from a rating system to censorship. It overflows with neatly framed box office data that project the growth of the market and show how, whilst the Chinese box office for the time being still remains second in the world, it will soon overcome the US, and it will be much greater within a decade from now, even where the most conservative projections are applied. So this I have taken from the blog of this guy. This is the current situation. Obviously, the blue one is the growth of the Chinese market, whereas you can see that the American one remains stagnated. Then, in another post, he makes conservative, these are his revised conservative estimates for the projected growth. I think every executive, they love this kind of displays. Obviously, works very well. Of course, all this rhetoric is only for the sake of creating a narrative that would facilitate the one-way entry of Hollywood product into the People's Republic. Lost in Thailand, for example, a box office smash hit which recorded over 40 million admissions in China, and based on unreliable data, has made more than 200 million RMB, based on incomplete records, was only released in 35 theaters in the USA over 2 weekends, and according to the box office mojo, has scored only 57,000 American dollars. Now, obviously, it's not even reached the diasporic audiences. And similar is the fate of current blockbusters, So Young and Finding Mr. Right. There is no evidence of interest among American distributors, neither mainstream nor art house ones, to pick up Chinese product for distribution in North America's territories, even where there is evidence of the blockbuster quality of the films, as evidence with the lessons learned from the story of the distribution of Zhang Yimou's Hero, which I have written about elsewhere and I'm happy to discuss, but not at the moment. Like the business card stakeholders who return to Shanghai every year do not go there for the films, those of them who speak up publicly against Chinese censorship do not do it to highlight the plight of ostracized independents. In most cases, they have not heard of them, nor is it meant to enable more of their films to travel or to be seen locally. All talk of censorship is nowadays for one purpose only, getting into the marketplace, and it comes from industry figures demanding reforms of censorship laws like Yu Dong, CEO of China's biggest film distributor, Bona Films, and Wang Jianlin, China's second richest man and owner of Wonder Group, which has last year acquired American theater chain AMC Entertainment. In scholarly circles, most of the investigation of censorship and the examples that excite and are examined is evolving around the limitations faced by independence and the effective exclusion of this whole rich aspect of filmmaking from the officially recognized cinematic output. However, the recent surge of dissent among filmmakers, while supported by some of the independents who made careers on the festival circuit, comes mainly from directors of an established status quo standing, if I'm not wrong. These include Feng Jiaogang, described as China's Spielberg, who, in a recent appearance, which again is online, called censorship a great torment for every director in China, like, you know, when he used the uses the word censorship. This is on CCTV, obviously it's a bleep. But it was widely covered anyhow. Or veteran director and producer GFAs, who last December called for replacing the rule of man with the rule of law, and demanding replacing the opaque and arbitrary censorship practices with a transparent film classification system, similar to the one we have got in Britain. However, there is a great deal of Hollywood complacency in all this, with the growing number of Hollywood films undergoing the cuts demanded by China's censors for the sake of seeing the films distributed in this vast territory. It comes along with the respective euphemistic rhetoric. It is not about succumbing to censorship demands, it is about making films user-friendly. Examples include modifications to the latest James Bond vehicle Skyfall and to Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained, both of which were extensively recut to be released. Director James Cameron, who has recut Titanic for nudity and other scenes for distribution in China, said, "I'm against censorship, but this is an important market." Even though many Hollywood directors have been extremely vocal on matters of censorship in principle over the years, there is no sign of solidarity at the moment. It is a situation where Hollywood's conformism and cooperation with the censors effectively undermines the anti-censorship effort of Chinese independence. Director Zhang Yuan has called Hollywood's interactions with the film censors collaborationists. To conclude, whilst the corrective exhibitions, many of which evolve around the dichotomy of officially sanctioned versus independent censored cinema, are busy with the idealistic project of facilitating the representation and even the translation of the real or actual China, the pragmatics are busy with the sensible, down-to-earth project of setting up for business. It is a situation best described with the proverb which we have in Bulgaria: "The dogs are barking, yet the caravan goes on." In the words of festivals, there are festivals that provide a platform for barking, but then there are festivals that ensure that the caravan goes on, no matter what. Thank you.